Now, for this one, we're just going to be going over some current events because I just want to basically just kind of hit some certain things. First, I'm just going to basically go over some of the things on the trending news on YouTube. Says right here, Trump on humanitarian aid for Venezuela. Now, when it comes to this, I think the fact is you're talking about basically the reason why is the aid has been stopped is for one major reason, is because you're talking about Maduro's very, very cautious on it coming in because of past actions of the United States government when such aid has come in, because it's been very, very suspect. They claim it as humanitarian aid, but it is never really humanitarian aid. We've seen this in the past with the case in the Middle East when we had Elliot Abrams handling that, and again, Elliot Abrams is handling this in Venezuela. We also seen the case of so-called humanitarian aid through our events in the Middle East, and that was with John Bolton. Both John Bolton and Hillary Clinton on board, and John Bolton is the basically head of the I believe it's national security. So you're talking is both these people are on board. So you're talking it is very, very suspect. And when we're talking when something's very, very suspect like that, that should be that's a very, very big reason. Now, when we look at cases like that, is what they'll usually do. They'll usually say, "Oh, there's humanitarian aid." Well, how much of that is really humanitarian aid, and how much of that is guns, ammos, ground-to-air missiles, and all these other things that are really with that. Now, if you look at the actual number of monetary value, that seems to be historically high in monetary value for it to just be actual aid like food and clothing and medicine. That seems to be a little bit high in value for it to just be fitting under that when it's for the actual shipment of trucks. That seems to be looking like it's weaponry. And this is why Maduro is very, very suspect, because he sees what happened with Gaddafi. He sees what happened with the case of Saddam Hussein, and he does not want that to happen with him. And he was more than willing to deal with the situation for dealing with debt peacefully with the Chinese and with Russia. So it seems like he's more than willing to deal peacefully with people. But the fact is, he's not willing to deal with a country that is basically stating that they want him replaced and are basically have a very, very poor record with lying about saying they're willing to do things peacefully, and then all of a sudden basically say, oh, we're going to basically, oh yeah, we're just bringing humanitarian aid, and all of a sudden basically it's ground-to-air missiles, it's basically heavy weaponry, and basically they're basically bringing in their people to basically have you physically removed and killed. Well, out of self-preservation, you're going to be saying, no, I'm going to be blocking that. We're not going to allow these trucks in. Or, I mean, to be, for the least bit, I mean, you should allow Maduro's people to inspect these to make sure they're weapons. If they're weapons, Maduro's people should allow the weapons to be confiscated or removed. For the least bit. I mean, because the fact is they should not be allowed to bring in weaponry. If it's food and such like that, allow them to inspect the whole thing. Don't allow them to basically go through uninspected, because the fact is that's what the U.S. wants. The U.S. wants this stuff totally uninspected. and the U.S. wants to be there during the inspection, fine. That's perfectly acceptable. But the U.S. doesn't want this. The U.S. says, oh, just let the trucks through. And that seems very, very suspicious. Now, I'm not talking like, oh, I'm anti American like that with it. No, first of all, this is basically a case of this looking very, very suspicious, because this is where Trump is basically, he's been in a case where he's just been taking orders from John Bolton. Now, he needs to listen to the case where John Bolton was one of the 4 people that was key in the Iraq War. Now, this is the same Iraq War that he opposed when he was not a candidate, and he was basically talking and stating the Iraq War was a mistake and it was based on false intelligence. Now, this is back when he was a businessman. Now all of a sudden he's basically listening to everything Bolton says, because the people there are not letting him listen to any alternative media, and they're basically just allowing him to see these Fox News neoconservatives that are telling him that John Bolton is this brilliant man and he knows everything he's talking about. So basically they're trying to bolster up John Bolton, so he listens to John Bolton. And Bolton, again, is what it call, has been a big problem when it comes to foreign policy. John Bolton has actually caused a bunch of military men to die. If Trump wants to actually visit some of these hospitals, he'd see what the actual casualties of John Bolton and Hillary Clinton and Colin Powell and Benjamin Netanyahu. He could see Dick Cheney, and he can see the casualties, and Barack Obama, he can see all the casualties of all of these people have actually caused, and he can go to all these military hospitals and see the casualty of what they've caused, and maybe visit some graves of people who actually committed suicide from PTSD from actually having to kill innocent civilians. And that's basically the cause of this. And maybe if we actually start looking at that, and actually maybe had a foreign policy of actually only looking out for when we of actually defending the U.S. and the U.S. only and our territories only, that we'd actually start realizing this. And he doesn't realize that. He basically has bought into what John Bolton is, the garbage that John Bolton is feeding him, and that's the whole point on that. Now we're going to go on to the next one with its. This is from CBC, and it's the growing skepticism about the attack on Jussie Smollett, and this is from 9 hours ago. I mean, this is not even skepticism. This is basically, we've gotten to the point to where he has actually hired a defense lawyer. We are well past skepticism. Once you hire a defense lawyer, that means the actual they're actually going to basically essentially run a case against you. And this is a major thing that needs to be understood, is once they start doing that, that means they're actually running an actual legitimate case against you. And this is one of the points that needs to be understood, and that once that happens, it means they've already declared that you have actually created a false event and essentially did this for attention, and that essentially the state's going to do a civil suit against you for quite a bit of money. Essentially, it's going to probably be near within 7 figures, at least mid 6 figures for what this caused. And we see that he did this for attention because he was no longer going to be acting on Empire. And he was doing this for attention to basically, to essentially raise his star power. And now he's basically hired a defense attorney because of this. So when they're stating that on this would be from Canada, and they've stated this from other points as well, from other sites as well with it, because there's still a lot of the legacy media that still stands by him, and they say that they weren't wrong in defending it, instead of actually looking into the case and realizing that something seemed funny from the start, and that's why a lot of other people seemed like something's a little funny here with it, because why would they do it? Because this is number one. When you look at Chicago, Chicago is a highly liberal city to begin with, and then he says two people jumped him and they what it called they screamed MAGA, some MAGA slogans at him, and then he changed the story of what they were screaming at him, saying they were screaming homophobic or racial slurs at him, and that there was a rope around the neck, and it just screamed what it called that when the story kept changing, and then he what it called, and then all of a sudden he points to the house, and it happens to be one of the people used to work basically was a somebody who worked on the actual show. There was another actor, and it's a Nigerian actor that he's friends with, and they started doing. And the friends start to actually talk and state that they were actually in on this whole thing, which is mostly what ended up being discussed was no, this never happened, and it blows up Barry back in his face that this was a staged event. Now it's coming back that it's showing up that he's now having to hire a defense attorney because he's going to court, and he's basically going to be facing still a suit from the state, or at least the city itself, for the actual damages that he caused for filing a false report. And they usually they don't file these on lower income people, but because they know he has income that he can pay them, they're basically stating, you know what, because you brought this out into the media, you were basically essentially bringing this as a whole big thing. Okay, you're now going to have to pay for this because you're going to have to pay for the damages that this caused, and this basically wasted resources essentially, especially in Chicago where resources are very, very valuable to actually look into real crimes. You wasted time on people's watch when there's actually a lot of black and black crime in gang-ridden areas that they seriously need to investigate, and they wasted time. They wasted a few days on you, actually up to like believe like a week on him, and they wasted time on him for something that he wanted to do for attention. Now that costs a lot of money. Now that's why the city is going to sue him for this because of what he caused. And that's why he's basically taking a defense attorney, because he's going to essentially wants to essentially deal with what he's going to have to pay out of pocket for what he caused damages to the city and the police department. And because essentially that actually causes resources to be used on him when it should have been actually been used for actually dealing with criminal cases that actually mattered something, actually dealing with someone who actually lost a loved one, not someone looking for attention. And that's the whole point on that one. When we looked now we see the down here at USA Today, Pledge Allegiance dispute leads to sixth graders arrest. That's because that's a little bit of an interesting thing with it. If we've seen that video, because there was essentially a case of where we see that essentially it was for creating the disturbance in the classroom, and essentially the event was basically something that was being blown up.
How many?
And this is in out in Polk County, and he was not for it was not for his refusal to participate, but it was for basically he's for his actual actions, referring to calling the teacher racist, and essentially his verbal assault on the teacher. and that's where we see with that one. Where the actual Q is wrong with it, if we actually, but if we look at history, we see that we see basically when we look at the situation of that, we see that historically is it wasn't he didn't come they didn't blacks didn't come to the U.S. with it via a route with it, because if we actually look at the actual route of the slave routes, the Columbian Exposition, the actual slave routes, we actually see that they could not take that route directly from Africa to America on the coast, because that was too dangerous of a route, and everyone knew it. They had to actually take a route south, which is actually in the Caribbeans. And usually what ended up happening was, when the United States would actually buy these slaves, they were already established down in the Caribbean. So what ended up happening was, it was actually the Brits that were actually purchasing the slaves. They were actually initially the ones purchasing the slaves from the usually either the African tribes. They were actually taking slaves from other tribes, or from the Islamic Caliphate themselves. So when these, so what's actually kind of humorous is when you find these blacks saying, "I'm not going to keep my slave name," which is essentially their freed name. I'm going to essentially take an Islamic name. Well, you're essentially going right back to the people who put you into bondage, which is actually quite humorous because of what you're doing. You're essentially sympathizing with with people who put you into bondage, which is essentially, I believe it's called the Stockholm Syndrome, which is sympathizing with your captors, and which is actually what they're essentially doing. So when these black people do it, say, "I'm going to become Muslim because I don't want to identify with my slave name," and all these other things like this. Well, the fact is that's the name that you were essentially freed upon. That's not a slave name. That's essentially a freed name. Your slave name is essentially these any things that you would essentially be associating with Islam, or any things you'd be associating with the whatever African tribe name you came over with. That's your slave name. Your freed name is whatever name you is whatever rightfully English name you have, or pronounced in English name you have. I would there could be varying cultures that actually would have it, because when people actually purchased the slaves, they were already well established in bondage. That was the whole thing. The United States never purchased directly, because we were essentially at that point already a colony of Britain at that point. We weren't essentially purchasing. We weren't actually purchasing slaves directly from them and coming over, or actually sending ships. We were never sending ships. The only types of ships we were going after is actually to pick up from the Caribbean, and that's what needs to be understood, is when you actually look at these ship routes, and that's the whole point. We were only sending ship routes actually down around and south from Virginia down into the Caribbean, and this is where, or even from the Carolinas down into the Caribbean at furthest. We were not going. We were not actually going into the areas of actually traveling across the Atlantic. It was too dangerous, because essentially the ship could essentially, number one, be attacked by those initial slave people selling slaves, because they'd essentially try to rob you and take the ship back, because they weren't going to be very reputable. If you were to do that, so you'd want to make sure the trip is short, And it'd be, especially if you were traveling that far, that would be very, very dangerous. And the actual waters were for especially a ship like that, would be very dangerous to travel in that type of direction. And especially when you get to the Ivory coastline. The Ivory coastline has very dangerous waters that you cannot just land your ship upon. To actually do that, your ship could actually be destroyed while you're essentially trying to pick up said slaves. And if you had people still on your ship, they could essentially die. And that's what needs to be understood. And that's why the U.S. never embarked in such trips, or Americans, whatever you want to call them. They would never have done such a brain dead journey. So when people try to argue that, when you have blacks trying to argue that point, it's absurd. Next thing is from Channel 4 News. 7 Labor MPs resign over Corbyn's leadership, and this is just showing where basically this is even happening, where he's even seeing some problems even in Canada, where their Labor Party is even or their new Labor Party is even having issues of issues as well with their leadership as well, and that this is just showing that basically it's you're not seeing the establishment parties exactly work out very well, and because the actual way they're going is they're just going downhill. That this is across all countries. It doesn't matter where they're going, and they're not planning out very, very well in the actual future, because the idea of, and I think this is going to be big time, is the idea of collectivism is not working out well. Here's one thing: is Trump threatens SNL with retribution over parody. I think Trump's overreacting with that. He just needs to understand that basically is that when it comes down to Alec Baldwin, frankly, Alec Baldwin is just on. This is from CNN. He needs to understand that Alec Baldwin just does a horrible impression, and he's just not even funny. And they'll give Alec Baldwin an award for it because they hand out those awards like they're like basically like it's nobody's business. Um, Pretty much, and it's a joke when it comes out to those Emmys. But when it comes, but he doesn't need to threaten retribution. He just needs to basically say that it's completely they've completely lost their touch, and that's all he has to do. Because I mean, and where my and then back to the idea of the stating where Canada's new Liberal Party or new Democratic Party's losing its touch with it. It says right here, Trudeau advisor Gerald Butts quits to miss SNC Lavalin scandal, and it's right there with it. Yes, Gerald Butts should essentially have basically left politics a long time ago, because he's essentially been violating things where government officials shouldn't be meeting with governmental agencies outside of that, and he's been guilty of this for so many years. I mean, basically well over a decade, and it's basically showing that it's looking like Trudeau's star is basically starting to dim to a great deal. Now, if we go over to Twitter, you're going to see the usual thing, hashtag Happy President's Day Obama, which is going to be usual liberal garbage, because you're going to do the it's the usual uh, it's the usual stuff of basically the never Trumpers, which is, I mean, just complete and utter garbage, because of they don't because you'll find a lot of stuff that on Twitter, because Twitter tends to want to push that. And anytime there's basically a president that they like with it, they'll boost them with it. But if there's a president they don't like, they'll tend to want to push them down. Now, I'm not saying on them necessarily 100% on Trump, as you saw that I criticized him just a couple of seconds ago on his things on both. I've criticized him here on his points on Venezuela. I've also criticized him on his points of that, and him on SNL, just for him to just basically ignore SNL and basically announce that they've lost their way. So when it comes down to that, that's just the major point. Let's see if this will actually load. Yeah, they're basically, I guess they're obsessing over Malia Obama, which is which I know that they're going to do that with it, because they love to do focus on that, because apparently if you're a daughter of a president, you're automatically a celebrity, which I've never understood. Guess what? You're not. I assume with the Roger Stone thing, that's still about the gag order. Once it wants to load. Yeah, Roger. Okay. Roger Stone photo of judge and crosshairs misinterpreted. Yeah, so there's nothing much with that. That's just mostly Twitter overblowing things. I see Twitter doing that a lot. They tend to want to overblow things on the right. Anytime that happens, they'll make a whole big deal. Let's see once this thing wants to load. Come on. But it's basically, with what I'm noticing on Twitter, there's not much going on with it when it comes to their thing on trending. Today's, as I expected with the slow news day, because of stuff going on, it's just basically just rehashing stuff, the usual. A lot of this blame right stuff with it. I mean, one of the pieces that I was watching earlier today was basically judging on this is actually from a video last night on Steven Crowder was basically on judging interview from or actually these selection of interviews of the CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, and basically going on the idea that how these questionings have gone. And the fact is he acts like, oh, you should, oh, people should get out of their bubble and not just subscribe to people on this certain ideology. And he starts naming all these people who are more independently minded, and they should and that they shouldn't just subscribe to them. Well, the fact is you're basically targeting people who are more independently minded, and then it's like you're basically and then when it comes down to it is if you look and then every time they're naming policies of, oh, what happened with this one, well, with this banning with it and they were starting to name independent journalists who were banned, and it's like, oh, I don't know on that, I don't know on that individual case, oh, I don't know on that individual case, and none of these people were actually pressing him on these things. And it's like, if you're the CEO and these individual journalists were actually had over 1 million followers, I'm sorry, but that's when you're talking about an actual business model, you should that's how you actually develop your money. That's how you're and these people, the larger number of followers are going to develop your money. These people of 1 million or more followers are essentially going to be your bread and butter. Those essentially are going to be the ones that are going to develop a lot more revenue for you. So the actual decision to ban a person of 1 million or more followers would essentially have to be a major one. Then this is what it goes down to. And when you do this with it, I can guarantee you that the CEO is not out of that link. He's not out of that link when it comes down to those decisions. So when he goes, well, I don't know. Well, I hate to tell you people, but that's a lie. That is basically a lie directly to that person's face. And I don't care if it means where they say, oh, would you press him with it? Well, certain other people are saying they wouldn't. Well, to me with it, I'd press them because, frankly, those are answers that people want to get. And until you start pressing people like this, okay, you might not get another liberal guest on your podcast or whatever. But frankly with it is when it comes down to it, you're if you start pressing him and he starts getting nervous and gives you those and eventually gives you those answers, your podcast is going to explode. That's the whole point. Is when you start pressing a guy for answers, and you essentially kind of shine the light in his face and essentially say, "Come on, feed me the answers with it. You're not leaving until we get some answers here, buddy." You start doing that, eventually, what's going to happen is you're eventually going to get a situation to where to where people are going to be saying, "Hey, this podcast was able to actually get some answers out of this guy by essentially interrogating him for 10 hours. It doesn't matter how long you have to keep him there. Lock the door, turn off all the lights except for the light shining right in his face. I don't care what you have to do. Tell him he ain't eating until tell him he doesn't get a bite of food or a drink of water until he gets some answers. Frankly, I don't care what you have to do. You can easily buy a taser or two. I mean, it's not that hard. I mean, I've seen YouTubers use those like massage things that basically hurt like hell when you turn them on. Use like one of those or something. Use a dog collar or something and shock him until he gives you the answers that are the truth. Hell, Steven Crowder went through to prove waterboarding wasn't as bad as people made it out to be. Try that one out for size. Maybe you'll get some answers if you do that one for a while. But the fact is we know that he's not being completely honest with people. We know that he's basically in on these bands of these more prolific people. And the fact is people are going to say, "Oh, it's not going to happen to me." Well, guess what? It is. Uh, you're going to make the wrong statement. You're going to basically have the wrong opinion that he doesn't like, and he's going to say, "Ban that person." He's playing Caesar right now, and the fact is he's going to basically say, "Off with their head." Send them to the lions, and that's what's going on right now. And then he goes on these podcasts. Doesn't matter which one he goes. You start asking him a question of, "Oh, why was this person banned?" I don't know. Must be. We must have been unclear on the terms of service. We need to really work on that. And that's the way things go with it, and that's what's happening, and that's what we're seeing out there. And he's going, we don't really know what's going on with the terms of service. Um, we just really need to be more clear on the terms of service. If terms of service have changed, and it's really just unclear why this person was banned. I just don't know on the individual case. I don't really know, and that's essentially what he's given these people. And the fact is someone needs to actually kind of grow a pair and actually start pressing him. And when it comes down to other things with it, one of the things I do like is uh, it's actually recent with it. It was actually on the Gutfeld show. It was actually on with Kat Tim's comment back on uh, against Jonah Hill trying to what it called question traditional masculinity, and she makes an actual real nice comment on what her opinion on what him as going into filmmaking is supposed to be with it. And he wants to challenge traditional masculinity, and she makes a very good point. And I don't know if this is going to actually pick up, but audio wise, but
It's not a real journey. I hope you take this journey with me, but you're not really going anywhere. I prefer real journeys, like in a car or a plane or a train.
Yeah, Jonah Hill needs to shut up because this is ruining men.
Yes.
The last guy that I dated cried more than I did, and I once cried because my dad told me I looked tired. I don't want to see you cry. I want to see you in the forest chopping wood. Okay? You should not have time to cry because you'd be too busy fixing things up around my apartment and offering to pay for my dinner. If there's a spider in my apartment, you can't be shrieking in the corner with me. You gotta go man up and kill that. And you know what? Like the last couple guys that I've dated have complained to me like, you don't pay enough attention to my feelings. You're not supposed to have that many feelings. I'm supposed to have all the feelings that I talk to you about and annoy you, and then you go to the bar with your friends and drink beer and grunt at each other. That's what you're supposed to do. So shut up, Jonah Hill. You're ruining everything.
All right. Okay. Gotta move on. You go, girl. Don't.
and she points out right there that she's basically that Kat Temp is basically annoyed with all these people like Jonah Hill that are saying they want to change the idea of masculinity and all this idea of toxic masculinity. She's basically annoyed with that. She's sick of these people. She feels that people should be more of a traditional. There should be more of a role of a traditional male that's actually willing to do the things that traditional males do. You know, kill a spider in the corner and go out there, chop the wood, do the actual traditional male things, and not be one of these weenie beta males out there that whines about their feelings and is one of these like whiny males that's on their, you know, the types that's what it called that's on their has their YouTube channel of putting on makeup and all this other garbage and say, oh, straight males can do this. No, straight males aren't there on YouTube channels putting on makeup. I'm sorry, but that's not what traditional masculinity is about. And we don't need to challenge traditional masculinity. You're not going to say, oh, but it's about treating women right. Well, the fact is, if you're going to find treating women with respect, you're going to find it with traditional masculinity, because they're not going to be treating women with disrespect. The ones who are treating women with disrespect are people on the left that are saying, "Oh, we need to challenge, we need feminism and treating women and oh, I treat women with respect. I'm a male feminist." Yeah, like Harvey Weinstein. He's a male feminist. He's actually what he called come out in the open. He was the one who came out in the open and said he's a male feminist. Yeah, see how well that worked out? He's a rapist. Every person who says they're a male feminist is basically you should be able to automatically assume that there's something clearly wrong with them. Yeah, there's basically, when it comes down to that, you want someone that's actually going to treat women with respect. They sure as hell better not be a male feminist, because when it comes down to it, you actually want a traditional masculine male that's actually going to go out there and treat females with respect, actually treat them as individuals, and actually treat them as they actually matter as people. I'm sorry, but holding the door open for a woman is not disrespecting them. And you're not going to get I mean, you can go with your people who are going to, if you want a male feminist, you can get sexually assaulted all you want. Or you can actually get someone who's actually going to hold the traditional, go with someone who's traditional that has fits the role of traditional masculinity, that's going to hold the door open, that's going to pay for the dinners, that's going to actually do these things that are actually acting like an actual gentleman. You have the actual choice, and this is the whole point. And I think this is something that Kat Temp actually brings up with it, that she's sick and tired of these people, but in her case, she's stuck because of her job living in New York. So she's filled with all these people around her that actually are male feminists and these weenies that she has to live with. I mean, and she has to deal with these people that are actually unwilling to act like normal people. And you'll get guys who basically go, oh, I want to put up makeup and eyeshadow, and no, you don't. You actually want to look like a normal person. And you want to go like a normal person, and basically, there's a spider in the corner. Basically, use Dr. Foot and kill it when they're actually worried about the spider in the corner. End of story. Don't be the one jumping up on the bar stool, screaming like a little girl. It's real simple. You're probably going to say, oh, but that's sexist. Well, trust me with it. If you want to hear more sexist things, you can actually talk to my fiance. If my fiance's actually said a lot more sexist things than you're ever going to hear coming out of my mouth. And she's what it calls, and she's basically said more and more things than you can ever imagine with it. And she actually prefers a more traditional male than anything out there than what you would actually think of. And that's just the way things go with it. If you're looking for that weenie, then fine, go get your weenie, go get your male feminist, and be happy. But if you're actually looking for someone real, then you're going to have a little bit of a harder time when people like Jonah Hill start portraying this weenie role and beta male and soy boy thing as the new thing out there to do. And the reason why I say about soy boy is because the fact is soy has plant-based estrogen, and estrogen is a female hormone that you take to actually boost estrogen. And they do this during menopause. They do give this to women during menopause for a natural supplement. and this is just basic scientific fact. And probably gonna make people real mad during this one as well, but frankly, I pretty much am going to get used to that one. So if you like this, like, subscribe, click on the notification bells, share this live stream around, and I will see you guys later. It'll probably be my last post for the day, which is about Ayn Rand is probably going to come up a little bit after this, which is a little bit unexpected, but that's just how things go. And see you guys later. Bye, everyone.